Hello, this is my tutorial on how to use the healing brush tool. Right, so the healing brush tool can be very useful when editing essentially any type of image that has a particular issue, whether it might be a scanned image that has dust marks, scratches, or perhaps you're scanning a negative that has a scratch on it or just some kind of issue that it leaves behind. It could even be a fingerprint. It can even be used in other circumstances where you have items in the image that you want to take out and make it look as though they were never there to begin with. So what I have here over on the layers panel, you'll notice I have a few things here. Essentially what I'm going to be working with here is an old image that I got from the internet for the sake of this tutorial. There's a bunch of things on here such as dust, hair, scratches, a few particular issues in general. I have a couple versions of this image that I have already edited, and those we don't really need to be concerned about with this tutorial. I do have another layer that I just created for the sake of demonstrating some particulars about the healing brush. Now, when you first use the healing brush, you're going to have to set what I call a sample point or a reference point, depending on how you want to look at it. You can even call it an anchor point if you want. But the tool itself, it just looks like a brush. It's a round object. Up underneath the Photoshop label next to the file menu up here, you have this little drop down for the Band-Aid tool, which is also the healing brush tool. You can create presets, that kind of thing. And just to the right of that, there's this drop down, lets you adjust the size and the hardness if you want a really sharp edge without any fading out or anything like that. You can adjust the spacing, that type of stuff. If you have a pen tablet, you can have it adjust its size based on pen pressure. I keep mine at about 50% hardness because I find that works well for just about every application. So what you need to do when you first pull it out is you actually have to hold down the Alt key or the Option key on a Mac, and you're going to notice it turns into a crosshair. And what you want to do is when you Alt click, you want to hold Alt or Option and then click, and this is setting your anchor point or your sample point, just depending on how you want to look at it. And what that does is that pulls data from that location that you've set as your anchor point, and it allows you to paint it elsewhere to actually apply the healing brush. So if I set an anchor point right here in the center, click, and then I move my brush over to another area in the gray, you're not going to notice it. It's going to give you a preview inside of the brush. So you can see now that I'm on the black, it's pulling information from the gray area and applying it to the black. If I do it the other way around, I Alt click or Option click in the black and I go to the gray, it's going to be obvious that it's sampling from the black. And what would happen is I'd paint it here. And then when I let go, it actually applies it and tries to blend it in. Now, it's not going to be obvious what's going on here just because both of these are completely flat surfaces. There's no texture. There's no variation in lightness, darkness values, or anything like that. In terms of texture, they're perfectly smooth. If I were to Alt click on the edge here and then go into the gray, you notice that looks like I only have a piece of the black there, but I actually have a piece of the gray on the top because it's showing what's on top and bottom of the edge. And that does become more obvious in a place like this. And to kind of further demonstrate that point a little bit more, I'll go ahead and fill this section in here with black so I have a vertical edge that I can reference as well. Now I still have that same sample point I set here on the edge. If I go to and hit Control D or Command D to deselect that, if I go over here, now it'll become more obvious that I have what's around that edge selected since I anchored my brush right at the center of that. So if I were to apply this up here in the gray, you'll notice that that anchor point, the little crosshair appears below, and as I move my brush, that anchor point is going to follow my brush motion. Now, if I were to move my brush farther up and start applying it, it's still going to start at that initial reference point. Once you click or start the motion, it'll continue on until you either release your mouse or pull your pen tool off of the tablet. Now, since I have different things going on here, you're going to notice that it actually affects the image differently than if I go from a monochromatic to a monochromatic with the same pixel texture. I'm going to go ahead and hide this layer and go back to the image below and show you how this applies here. So you want to set a sample point, which is very important. And what you select as your sample point is going to depend on what you're doing and where. For example, if I was going to fix this gentleman's face, you can tell that there are some issues on his cheek area here. Just I'm going to go ahead and hit the left bracket key to bring my brush size down a little bit. You can tell that there is this hair mark down here. There's what might be a scratch, a couple of issues up here, some dust. What you want to do is set a sample or your anchor point somewhere that's in an area where you have some room around the anchor point to sample from without overlapping any issues like this. So I'm going to go ahead and select this area here. I'm going to hit Alt or Option and click, and then notice you don't see that other edge that I was showing. If I bring it over to his mustache, you can see that it's sampling his cheek now with the preview. So now what I can do is I can paint over this little issue spot here, and you'll notice it applies something when I let go, it tries to blend it in. And if you don't have much area to work with, where there's a lot of issues, say I had a lot of dust spots and really very few spots where it was the skin as it should look, what you want to do is start cleaning up the area around where you're sampling. So if I sample here, I have a couple pieces of dust here, 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 and here that are pretty close to my sample points. What I would want to do is click, let go so it doesn't move, click, kind of move it just very slightly so I don't sample too far away from my anchor point. And this will clear me up this little area so I can actually start moving the brush around farther before I have to let go and click. This minimizes the amount of brush strokes you have in your history, so if you need to step backwards and undo something, it's, there's few things to undo. But it also becomes important when you approach these edge areas where your brush will sample the edge and apply it to some place you don't want it to. And to talk about that more specifically, sampling an edge can actually be rather beneficial for a couple of reasons. So I still have that same point sampled up here, and I want to get rid of this dust spot down here near the collar. If I get too close to the collar and I let go, it's going to sample. It's not so obvious because these tones are pretty close. What I'll do is I'll show you this a little bit farther down here. So if I sample the collar, and I go close to the edge of the collar where the black of the lapel meets, and I sample to try to get rid of this little dust spot, it's actually going to average, it's going to pull some of that black up. Or if I do it vice versa, I sample the collar of the coat and I try to clean up something close to the edge near the white edge, it's going to start pulling in white from the collar, and this obviously is something that I don't want. So what you can do to avoid that, if you have something close to the edge or overlapping the edge, I'll go ahead and make this a little bit more obvious, and I'll create a mark that overlaps the edge like that. So I can fix that with my healing brush by sampling on the edge itself. And what this does is, you'll notice I have the preview. If I go up into the white, you'll see where it has the black end of it. If I go down here, you'll notice it has the preview. You can see the other side of it. Or if I go somewhere in between, you might be able to see both edges of that. Now, what I want to do is, with that preview in the brush, is actually try to center that right on the edge on the problem area. Click, hold it down, and paint over the entire problem area on both sides. And as I go below the edge, my anchor point where it samples from starts to sample black. The second I hit the edge, it samples the edge, and then once I cross over to the other side of the edge, it samples what's on the other side of the edge, so I don't get any issues with it pulling information over. Sometimes you get a weird little artifact like this, but you can just sample in that side and kind of clean it up a little bit, and this makes this process much easier. And that's pretty much all there is to the healing brush. Just to point out one more thing, same way that the edge can be affected by where you sample. If I was going to fix his hair, you'll notice that his hairs go in a different direction here than they do up here. If I were to sample this section up here, and then I try to paint it in over here on the right, you'll notice it's going to carry over the pattern of his hair. And this is what I was referring to as a texture, like pixel texture. It'll transpose that over here, and you'll get this weird artifact that doesn't look right. So you do need to be mindful of edges and also patterns that are there, and try to sample something that has a similar orientation or a similar pattern if you were sampling a stucco wall and trying to repair another surface that is a lot less textured, you're going to notice that the texture carries over even if it becomes the correct color. And you can use this healing brush tool to take care of any kind of issues like this, and you can end up with a final result free of scratches and dust marks. And obviously this has some saturation values taken out, and then also I've adjusted the contrast, but you can see that I've gotten rid of all the dust and all the hairs and scratches and stuff like that, and makes it look like it was a brand new image. Thank you for watching my tutorial on the healing brush. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comment section below. I will do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you very much.